The bitter winter wind cut through Sarah Mitchell's thin coat as she trudged through the snow-laden forest. Her hand instinctively moved to protect her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant and completely alone. 3 days ago, the wagon train had left without her. Whether by cruel intention or terrible oversight, it didn't matter now. All that mattered was finding shelter before nightfall. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, Sarah spotted a thin wisp of smoke. In the distance, with her last ounce of strength, she moved toward it, unaware that this moment would change her life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ohio Territory, 1795. Sarah Mitchell had always been told she had poor judgment when it came to men. At 23, she had already weathered enough heartbreak to last several lifetimes. But nothing compared to the devastation of watching Thomas Reynolds, her husband of less than a year, ride away with another woman, leaving her stranded at a trading post on the edge of the frontier. He said he'd return by sundown, Sarah explained to Mr. Blackwell, the trading post owner, as darkness fell on the second night. Something must have happened to delay him. Mr. Blackwell's weathered face showed no sympathy. Ma'am, I saw the way he looked at that Wilson woman. He ain't coming back. Sarah refused to believe it until the third morning, when the remaining members of their wagon train prepared to depart. She stood beside the rutted trail, one hand on her swollen belly, watching with increasing panic as the last wagon was loaded. Mrs. Reynolds, called out Jacob Tanner, the wagon master, we need to move on before the weather turns. Are you joining us or waiting for your husband? I can't leave, Sarah stammered. Thomas has all our money, our supplies. He'll return, I'm certain of it. Jacob's eyes revealed his doubt, but he nodded. We'll leave word at the next settlement. If he returns, you can catch up. Sarah watched in stunned silence as the wagon train pulled away, disappearing around the bend in the trail. It wasn't until they were gone that the full weight of her situation crashed down upon her. Alone, nearly 7 months pregnant, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of personal belongings, Mr. Blackwell allowed her to stay at the trading post that night, but his charity extended no further. Got a business to run, he explained the next morning. Can't be harboring strays. There's a settlement about 40 miles east. Might find work there. 40 miles, Sarah echoed, her hand protectively covering her belly. On foot? Mr. Blackwell shrugged. Unless you've got a horse I don't know about. He wasn't an entirely heartless man. He gave her a day's worth of provisions and an old wool blanket before sending her on her way. Sarah walked until sunset, following the crude map he'd scratched on a piece of bark. When darkness fell, she found shelter beneath a rocky overhang and spent a restless night listening to the wilderness around her. The next day brought rain, a cold, penetrating drizzle that soaked through her clothes and chilled her to the bone. By noon, she was shivering uncontrollably. By dusk, she knew she had veered off course. There was no sign of the trail Mr. Blackwell had described, only endless trees and rolling hills. On the third day, the rain turned to snow. Sarah's fingers and toes grew numb as she pushed forward, no longer certain which direction would lead to safety. Her thoughts turned increasingly desperate. What would become of her baby if she died out here? The child inside her kicked forcefully, as if sensing her fear. I won't give up, she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I promise you that. As the light began to fade on that third day, Sarah spotted a thin wisp of smoke rising above the trees. Summoning her last reserves of strength, she moved toward it, stumbling over roots and rocks hidden beneath the snow. The smoke led her to a small clearing where a log cabin stood, its chimneys spewing the promise of warmth. Sarah hesitated at the edge of the clearing. The stories of native attacks on settlers had been told around every campfire along their journey west. But the cold was seeping into her bones, and the baby had been too still for too long. With no other choice, she stepped into the open and approached the cabin door. Her knock was weak, barely audible even to her own ears. When no response came, she knocked again, harder this time, desperation lending her strength. The door swung open, and Sarah found herself face to face with a tall man holding a rifle. His features were sharp and weathered, his dark eyes regarding her with surprise and suspicion. "Please," Sarah managed before her legs gave way beneath her. The man dropped his rifle and caught her before she hit the ground. The last thing Sarah remembered was being lifted in strong arms and carried into blessed warmth. She awoke to the crackling of a fire and the rich aroma of something cooking. For a moment, Sarah thought she was back home in Pennsylvania, that the entire journey west had been nothing but a terrible dream. Then the baby kicked, and reality came rushing back. She was lying on a bed of furs near a stone fireplace. A pot hung over the flames, steam rising from its contents. Sarah tried to sit up, but her body protested, every muscle aching from days of exposure and exertion. "You should rest." The voice came from the shadows on the other side of the cabin. Sarah turned to find the man watching her from a rough-hewn chair. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30, with copper skin and black hair pulled back with the leather cord. His clothing was a mix of buckskins and settler's garb. "You're Shawnee?" Sarah observed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Half," he corrected. "My father was Shawnee. My mother was like you." He stood and moved to the fireplace, stirring the contents of the pot. "My name is Daniel Creek." Sarah struggled to sit up, succeeding on her second attempt. "I'm Sarah Mitchell." She stopped herself. "Sarah Reynolds. My husband is Thomas Reynolds." Daniel nodded toward her belly. "And where is this husband?" The question brought a fresh wave of pain that had nothing to do with her physical condition. He'll be looking for me. We got separated." Daniel's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes told Sarah he didn't believe her. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. "Eat," he said simply. "Then sleep. Tomorrow we can talk about getting you to the settlement." The stew was rich with venison and wild roots. Sarah hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate quickly, almost desperately, then immediately felt ashamed of her lack of manners. "Thank you," she said, setting the empty bowl aside. "I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found your cabin." "I know what would have happened," Daniel replied matter-of-factly. "You and your child would have died." His bluntness was startling but not unkind. Sarah found herself appreciating his honesty after months of Thomas's empty promises and sweet lies. "Why are you alone out here?" she asked. Daniel moved back to his chair. "I prefer it. The settlement has little use for a half-breed, and my mother's people were driven west years ago." He picked up a piece of wood and a knife, beginning to carve with practiced strokes. "I hunt, trap, trade with both sides. It's a good life." Sarah watched his hands work the wood, strong and sure. "It seems lonely." "Less complicated," he countered. "No one to disappoint, no one to be disappointed by." The words struck Sarah like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what had happened with Thomas? A lifetime of expectations and disappointments, culminating in the ultimate betrayal. Exhaustion soon overtook her, and Sarah drifted into a deep sleep. She dreamed of her childhood home, of her parents who had died of fever the previous year, leaving her with no anchor in the world except Thomas, charismatic, handsome Thomas, who had promised her a new life in the Ohio Territory. When Sarah woke again, pale light was filtering through the cabin's single window. Daniel was gone, but the fire still burned. She managed to stand, her legs wobbly but functional. The cabin was simple but well-crafted, with a table and chairs, shelves lined with provisions and various tools hanging from the walls. A half-finished cradle stood in one corner, the wood smooth and polished. The door opened, and Daniel entered, carrying an armful of firewood. He paused when he saw her standing. "You look better," he observed. "Color's back in your face." Sarah nodded. "I feel stronger. Thank you for your kindness." Daniel stacked the wood beside the fireplace. "Weather's turned. Heavy snow is coming. Won't be able to reach the settlement for at least a week, maybe more." Sarah felt a flicker of panic. "A week, but You were heading east," Daniel interrupted. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell at the trading post said there's a settlement about 40 miles east." Daniel shook his head. "Blackwell sent you the wrong way. Settlement's northeast, and it's closer to 60 miles. Even in good weather, that's no journey." For a woman in your condition, Sarah sank into one of the chairs, her momentary strength deserting her. "What am I going to do? I can't impose on you, and I have nowhere else to go." "You'll stay until the snow clears," Daniel said simply. "Then we'll figure out what comes next." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The storm arrived that afternoon, a howling blizzard that buried the landscape in white. Sarah stood at the window watching the snow pile up against the cabin walls, feeling both trapped and strangely safe. Daniel moved quietly around the small space, preparing food, mending tools, seemingly undisturbed by her presence. "Have you lived here long?" Sarah asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 5 years, Daniel replied. "Built it myself after my father died. And your mother?" "Died when I was young. Fever." He glanced up from his work. "Your family?" "Gone," Sarah admitted. "My parents passed last year. I have a sister somewhere in Virginia, but we haven't spoken in years." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. They were both alone in the world, adrift without family ties. The realization created an unexpected bond between them. As days passed, the snow continued to fall, trapping them together in the small cabin. Sarah discovered that Daniel was not the silent, stoic figure she had initially taken him for. He told stories of his childhood, straddling 2 worlds, but never fully belonging to either. He spoke of his father, a Shawnee hunter who had fallen in love with a settler woman and chosen to live apart from both communities rather than give her up. In turn, Sarah shared her own story, her sheltered upbringing in Pennsylvania, her whirlwind, courtship with Thomas, and the harsh realities of their journey west. She found herself able to speak honestly about Thomas's betrayal, admitting what she had been unwilling to face before. "He abandoned me," she said one evening as they sat before the fire. "He chose another woman and left me with nothing." Daniel's expression darkened. "Some men don't deserve the name. I was a fool to believe him," Sarah continued, tears welling in her eyes. "Every promise he made was a lie, and now this child will have no father." "A father who abandons his child is worse than no father at all," Daniel said firmly. "My father taught me that a man provides, protects, stays true to his word. This Thomas taught you only that some men cannot be trusted." There was something in his voice, a quiet intensity that resonated with Sarah. She studied him across the firelight, his strong profile, the steadiness of his hands as he worked, the careful way he spoke, weighing each word before offering it, so different from Thomas's glib charm. On the 7th day of the storm, the snow finally ceased. The world outside the cabin was transformed, pristine white stretching in every direction. Daniel ventured out to check his traps and hunt, returning with a brace of rabbits and news of the trail conditions. "Still impassable," he reported. "At least another week before you could travel safely." Sarah nodded, surprised to find she felt relief rather than disappointment. The past week had brought a peace she hadn't experienced in months. Here, in this simple cabin with this straightforward man, she didn't have to pretend or worry about. Measuring up to expectations, Daniel accepted her as she was, pregnant, abandoned, vulnerable, offering shelter without judgment. That night, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew, Sarah felt the first sharp pain low in her belly. She gasped, nearly dropping her bowl. Daniel was instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Sarah assured him, forcing a smile. "The baby is just active tonight." But an hour later, another pain tore through her, stronger than before. Sarah clutched the edge of the table, unable to hide her distress. "It's too early," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "The baby isn't due for another month." Daniel moved to her side, his expression concerned but calm. "Early doesn't always mean trouble. My father delivered many babies." "You've done this before?" Sarah asked hopefully. "I've helped birth foals, fawns caught in traps," he admitted. "Never a human child, but I remember what my father taught me." Another contraction gripped Sarah, and she gripped Daniel's hand without thinking. He didn't pull away, allowing her to squeeze until the pain subsided. "I'm afraid," she confessed. Daniel met her gaze steadily. "Fear doesn't help. Strength does. And you, Sarah Reynolds, are stronger than you know." The labor progressed through the night, Daniel proving to be a calm and capable attendant. He heated water, prepared clean cloths, and supported Sarah through each contraction. When her strength flagged, he spoke words of encouragement, his deep voice a steady anchor in a sea of pain. As dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, a new cry joined the howling of the winter wind, the healthy wail of Sarah's daughter. Entering the world, Daniel wrapped the infant in a soft deerskin and placed her in Sarah's trembling arms. "She's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she counted tiny fingers and toes. "Perfect and strong." Daniel smiled, the first full smile Sarah had seen from him. Like her mother. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and Sarah's blue eyes. As Sarah held her close, exhausted but exhilarated, she felt a surge of fierce love, unlike anything she had ever experienced. "Rebecca," she decided. "Her name is Rebecca." The days following Rebecca's birth passed in a haze of exhaustion and wonder for Sarah. Though the baby had arrived early, she was healthy and strong, with a lusty cry that seemed impossibly loud for such a tiny being. Daniel proved to be an unexpected source of support, fashioning a proper cradle from the one he'd been working on, and showing Sarah how to create soft swaddling cloths from rabbit skins. "Where did you learn so much about babies?" Sarah asked. One morning, as she watched him expertly swaddle Rebecca after a feeding, a shadow crossed Daniel's face. "My wife taught me." Sarah stared at him, surprised. In all their conversations, he had never mentioned a wife. "You're married." "Was," Daniel corrected, his voice flat. "Lily died 3 winters ago, along with our son." Sarah's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know." Daniel handed the now quiet Rebecca back to her. "Not something I speak of often." "What happened?" Sarah asked gently, sensing there was more to the story. Daniel moved to the fireplace, adding another log before answering. "Lily was like me, caught between 2 worlds. Her father was French, her mother Ottawa. We met at a trading post, built this place together." He paused, staring into the flames. "When she was carrying our child, there were complications. I rode for a doctor at the settlement, but they refused to come." "They refused?" Sarah echoed, in disbelief, said they wouldn't waste time on a savage's wife. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "By the time I found someone willing to help, it was too late. She'd delivered the boy alone, but there was too much bleeding. Both were gone when I returned." Sarah cradled Rebecca closer, understanding now why Daniel had been so intent on helping with the birth, why he'd seemed to anticipate her needs before she could voice them. He had been determined not to see history repeat itself. That's why. "You live alone," she said softly. "Why do you stay away from the settlements?" Daniel nodded once. "People fear what they don't understand, and they don't understand me." Sarah looked down at her daughter, then back at the man who had saved both their lives. "I understand you, Daniel Creek." A moment of silent connection passed between them, broken only when Rebecca began to fuss. As Sarah tended to her daughter, she found herself studying Daniel with new eyes, seeing not just the quiet strength that had first impressed her, but also the deep well of pain he carried. Pain that mirrored her own sense of betrayal and loss, different in its causes, but similar in its loneliness. As February gave way to March, the snow began to melt, revealing patches of brown earth beneath. Sarah grew stronger every day, moving around the cabin with increasing confidence, learning the rhythms of Daniel's solitary life and gradually finding her place within them. They developed an easy partnership, with Sarah taking over cooking and mending while Daniel hunted and checked his traps. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Rebecca sleeping between them, and talk of their lives before and their hopes for the future. "What will you do when the trail's clear?" Daniel asked one evening, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah hesitated. The question had been growing in her mind with each passing day. The settlement was an option. She could perhaps find work as a laundress or cook, but the prospect filled her with dread. She would be a woman alone with a child, subject to gossip and pity, struggling to make ends meet. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no home, no money, no family to turn to." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You could stay." The simple offer hung in the air between them. Sarah looked up, searching his face. "Here, with you. The cabin is small, but it shelters us from the storms. Games are plentiful. The creek never runs dry." Daniel spoke matter-of-factly, but there was a current of emotion beneath his words. Rebecca would have space to grow, away from those who might judge her or her mother. "And you?" Sarah asked quietly. "What would you gain from such an arrangement?" Daniel met her gaze. "An end to solitude. A purpose beyond survival." He paused, then added, "A family, perhaps, in time." The word family resonated within Sarah like a struck bell. Since her parents' death and Thomas's betrayal, she had believed that dream lost to her forever. Yet here it was, being offered by this quiet, steadfast man who asked nothing in return, except the chance to be part of their lives. "I can't answer yet," she said finally. "I need time to think." Daniel nodded, showing no disappointment. "The trails won't be passable for weeks yet. There's time." The next morning, Sarah awoke to find Daniel already gone, his rifle missing from its place by the door. A note written in careful script lay on the table. "Gone to check upper traps." Back by nightfall, Sarah spent the day alone with Rebecca, her mind turning over Daniel's offer. She moved around the cabin, touching the solid logs he had fitted together, the shelves he had built, the furs he had tanned. Everything spoke of care, of permanence, of a man who built to last. So different from Thomas, who chased dreams across the frontier, never satisfied, always looking toward the horizon. Could she build a life here, away from civilization? Would it be fair to Rebecca, growing up with no other children, no school, no church? Sarah had been raised in a small town, surrounded by community. The isolation of Daniel's existence felt foreign to her, yet there was peace here, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. Daniel respected her, valued her opinions, treated her as an equal partner in their daily life. He adored Rebecca, his stern face softening whenever he held her, his large hands impossibly gentle as they cradled her tiny form. As promised, Daniel returned at dusk, carrying 2 fox pelts and a string of trout. Sarah had prepared cornbread from the dwindling supply of meal, and they ate in comfortable silence. After the meal, as they sat by the fire with Rebecca asleep in her cradle, Daniel spoke. "There's something you should see tomorrow if the weather holds." Sarah looked up from her mending. "What is it?" "A place. Up the ridge." His eyes reflected the firelight. "Might help you decide." The next morning it dawned clear and mild. Daniel fashioned a sling for Rebecca from a soft deerskin, showing Sarah how to secure the baby against her chest. They set out after breakfast, following a narrow trail that wound up through the trees. The hike was steep in places, and Daniel offered his hand when the path grew treacherous, his grip strong and reassuring. After an hour's climb, they emerged onto a flat outcropping of rock that jutted from the hillside. Sarah gasped at the view that spread before them. The forest stretched for miles in every direction, a sea of green and brown. A wide river snaked through the valley below, glinting in the sunlight. In the far distance, a thin column of smoke marked the location of the settlement. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, turning slowly to take in the panorama. Daniel nodded, watching her reaction. "My father brought my mother here when he asked her to stay with him. He said it was important for her to see the world she would be choosing, its beauty and its solitude." "And she chose him," Sarah said softly. "She did." Daniel moved to stand beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "I've never brought anyone else here, not even Lily. This place was sacred to my parents." Sarah understood what he was telling her, that by bringing her here, he was offering more than shelter or protection. He was offering his heart, his future, his trust. "May I hold her?" Daniel asked, gesturing to Rebecca. Sarah nodded, carefully transferring the sleeping infant to his arms. Daniel cradled the child against his chest, looking out over the valley with an expression of profound peace. "This could be her land someday," he said. "A place where she belongs, where no one can take away her birthright." The thought of Rebecca having a home, a legacy, moved Sarah deeply. Thomas had promised her land in the new territory, but his promises had proven as substantial as smoke. Daniel offered not promises, but reality. A cabin already built, land already claimed, a life already established. They stayed on the ridge until midday, Daniel pointing out landmarks and telling stories of the land's history. As they made their way back down the trail, Sarah felt a growing certainty in her heart. The settlement represented safety in numbers, but also the judgment and limitations of society. Daniel's world offered freedom, partnership, and the chance to build something truly their own. That evening, as they prepared for sleep, Sarah finally gave her answer. "I want to stay," she said simply, "not just until the trail's clear, but for good, with you." Daniel's expression remained controlled, but his eyes revealed a flash of joy before he nodded. "Good. But I need to know what you expect," Sarah continued. "What role I would have in your life." Daniel considered her question carefully. "Not a servant, not property." He paused, searching for the right words. "A partner in all things." "And Rebecca, my daughter," he said without hesitation. "If you'll allow it." Sarah's breath caught at the certainty in his voice. "You would claim another man's child as your own?" "She has no father," Daniel replied. "Thomas gave up that right when he abandoned you both. I would raise her as my blood, teach her all I know, protect her with my life." Sarah stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "And me? What would I be to you?" Daniel met her gaze directly. "My wife, if you choose it. But that need not be decided now. We have time." The honesty of his answer touched Sarah deeply. There was no pressure, no demands, only the offer of a shared future built on mutual respect and growing affection. "I choose it," she said softly. "Not out of necessity or gratitude, but because I've come to care for you, Daniel Creek. Because I believe we could build a good life together. Daniel reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and cupped her face in his hand. His touch was gentle, reverent. Then we will be husband and wife in the ways of my father's people. When next we go to the settlement for supplies, we can be married in the ways of yours as well. Sarah leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. After all the upheaval and betrayal, she had found safety in the most unexpected place, with a man. The world had taught her to fear. In a wilderness she had been raised to dread. Yet here, in this moment, she felt more at home than she ever had in civilization. As spring unfurled across the landscape, Sarah and Daniel established new rhythms to their shared life. Daniel taught Sarah the skills she would need to thrive. In the wilderness, how to identify edible plants, how to tan hides, how to read the weather in the clouds, and the behavior of animals. Sarah, in turn, brought civilization's comforts to their rustic home, planting a garden with seeds Daniel traded for at a distant post, fashioning curtains for the cabin's window from an old dress, teaching Daniel to read better from her treasured Bible, the one possession she had managed to keep through all her tribulations. Rebecca thrived under their joint care, growing stronger by the day. Daniel fashioned toys for her from wood and bone, carving delicate animals and rattles that she would learn to grasp in the coming months. He often took her with him for short excursions, carrying her against his chest as he checked nearby traps or gathered firewood, speaking to her in a mixture of English and Shawnee, telling her the names of plants and animals. In April, when the trails were finally clear enough for travel, Daniel and Sarah made the journey to the settlement. Sarah was nervous about how they would be received. An unmarried white woman with a baby, accompanied by a half-Shawnee man. But she was determined to face whatever came with dignity. The settlement of Miller's Creek consisted of a handful of cabins clustered around a trading post and a small church. Heads turned as Daniel and Sarah rode in on Daniel's sturdy horse, Rebecca securely bundled between them. Whispers followed them as they made their way to the trading post. Inside, the proprietor, a barrel-chested man named Ellis, greeted Daniel with cautious respect. "Creek, been a while, thought maybe the winter got you. Takes more than snow to stop me," Daniel replied evenly. He gestured to Sarah. "This is Sarah Reynolds, my intended." Ellis's eyebrows shot up as he took in Sarah's obvious European heritage. "And the baby in her arms." "That's so." He looked between them, clearly puzzled by the pairing. Sarah lifted her chin. "It is. We've come to trade and to find the minister." Ellis scratched his beard. "Reverend Wright's here. Comes through once a month. Arrived yesterday." He eyed them speculatively. "Not sure he'll perform what you're asking." "He will," Sarah said with quiet confidence. "Or we'll find someone who will." While Daniel conducted their trading business, Sarah sought out the minister, a thin, bookish man with kind eyes. To her relief, Reverend Wright listened to her story without judgment, nodding thoughtfully as she explained how Daniel had saved her and Rebecca from certain death in the winter storms. "And you're certain this is what you want?" he asked gently. "Life out there isn't easy, especially for a woman raised in civilization." "I've never been more certain of anything," Sarah replied. "Daniel is a good man. He respects me, values me. He's already proven he would give his life for us if necessary." The Reverend studied her face, then nodded. "I've known Daniel Creek for years. He trades fairly, causes no trouble. His father was the same, honorable, despite what some said about him." He closed his Bible. "I'll perform the ceremony tomorrow morning, if that suits." Sarah thanked him profusely, hurrying back to share the news with Daniel. That night, they stayed in a small room behind the trading post, enduring curious stares from the settlers who came to gawk at the unusual couple. Daniel remained stoic, but Sarah could feel the tension in him, the way he positioned himself between her and the door, always alert for potential threats. "Are you certain about this?" he asked as they prepared for sleep. "Living out there, you'll miss this. People, conversation, community." Sarah looked around at the rough settlement, the suspicious faces, the limited horizon. "This isn't the community I want for Rebecca, or for myself." She took his hand. "Our cabin is more home to me than this place could ever be." The next morning, they stood before Reverend Wright in the simple log church. Sarah wore her best dress, freshly laundered but still showing the signs of her journey, with wildflowers Daniel had gathered at dawn woven into her hair. Daniel had donned a clean, buckskin shirt, his dark hair neatly tied back. Rebecca, wrapped in a blanket Sarah had embroidered with her name, slept peacefully in a cradle the minister's wife had provided. The ceremony was brief, but moving. When Reverend Wright pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel surprised Sarah by producing a simple band of gold, a family heirloom from his mother, he later explained, and slipping it onto her finger. The few witnesses, mostly the minister's family and curious onlookers, offered polite congratulations. As they prepared to leave the settlement, Ellis approached them, his manner gruff, but not unkind. "Creek, your woman might want to know. There was a man through here last fall asking about a Sarah Reynolds, said she was his wife." Sarah stiffened. "Thomas was here?" Ellis nodded. "Said he got separated from his wife at Blackwell's Post, was trying to find her. Asked if we'd seen a pregnant woman traveling alone." "What did you tell him?" Daniel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Nothing to tell. Hadn't seen her then." Ellis shrugged. "He moved on after a day or two, headed west with that Wilson woman." The news was both shocking and strangely freeing for Sarah. Thomas had at least made a pretense of looking for her, maintaining his facade of concern. But he had continued west rather than retracing his steps to Blackwell's Post, proof that his search had been for show. His concern was a lie. As they rode away from the settlement, Sarah leaning against Daniel's solid presence with Rebecca secure. Between them, she felt the last ties to her old life falling away. Thomas belonged to the past, a cautionary tale she would one day tell Rebecca, the story of a man who had unwittingly led her to true happiness by trying to destroy her. Ahead lay the wilderness, not as an enemy to be conquered, but as the backdrop for the new life they would build together. Sarah Mitchell Reynolds Creek had found her home at last, not in a place, but in the arms of a man who had given her shelter when the world turned its back, and in the future they would create for their daughter. Summer unfurled across the Ohio, territory in a riot of green. The forest around Daniel and Sarah's cabin burst into life, wildflowers carpeting the forest floor, birds nesting in the eaves, deer bringing their fawns to drink at the nearby creek. For Sarah, it was a season of discovery and growth as she adapted to her new life. The garden she had planted behind the cabin flourished under her care. Rows of corn, beans, and squash stretched toward the sun, while herbs she had traded for at the settlement added both flavor to their meals and remedies for common ailments. Daniel had expanded the garden's borders, building a sturdy fence to keep out foraging animals and creating a small gate that Sarah decorated with twining vines. Inside the cabin, Rebecca was thriving. At 5 months old, she had Daniel's solemn eyes and Sarah's quick smile. She could roll over on her own now and spent hours watching the patterns of sunlight and shadow dance across the cabin walls. Daniel had crafted a small chair for her, positioned near the window where she could look out at the world beyond. Sarah found a contentment in this simple life that had eluded her in civilization. The rhythm of days measured by sunrise and sunset, the satisfaction of work done with her own hands, the quiet evenings spent with Daniel as he taught her to read the stars. All of it filled a hunger in her soul she hadn't known existed. Daniel, too, seemed transformed by their union. The hard edges of solitude had softened in him. He laughed more readily, sang Shawnee lullabies to Rebecca, brought Sarah wildflowers when he returned from hunting trips. At night, he held Sarah with tender reverence, his passion tempered by gentle care. "I never thought to have this again," he confessed one evening as they lay together, the moonlight streaming through the window. "A family, someone to come home to." Sarah traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "Nor did I. After Thomas left, I believed that part of my life was over." Daniel caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Sometimes the trail takes an unexpected turn and leads exactly where you need to go," Sarah finished, moving closer into his embrace. Their idyll was interrupted in late July when a trader named Mackenzie arrived at their cabin, a grizzled Scotsman who traveled the territory with a string of pack mules. Mackenzie brought news of the wider world, along with goods to trade. "War brewing with the tribes up north," he reported as he examined the furs Daniel offered. "British stirring up trouble again, despite the treaty." Daniel's expression remained impassive, but Sarah saw the tension in his shoulders. "Which tribes? Miami, Shawnee, some Ottawa?" Mackenzie shrugged. "Armies sending more men to Fort Washington. Settlers are getting nervous." That night, after Mackenzie had continued on his way with Daniel's furs in exchange for ammunition, salt and sugar, Sarah found Daniel standing outside, staring into the darkness. "Are you worried?" she asked, joining him. "Worried? No." Daniel kept his eyes on the tree line. "But be cautious. War brings soldiers, and soldiers don't always distinguish between friendly tribes and hostile ones, or half-breeds living peacefully on their own." Sarah slipped her arm through his. "This is our land. No one can take it from us." Daniel looked down at her, his expression softening. "You sound like a Shawnee wife now." "I am a Shawnee wife," Sarah replied firmly, "and this is our home." The threat of conflict remained distant as summer waned into autumn. Their days were filled with harvesting and preserving the garden's bounty, smoking meat for the winter, gathering nuts and berries from the forest. Rebecca grew stronger by the day, now able to sit up on her own and reaching for everything within her grasp. Daniel spent more time teaching Sarah the skills she would need if ever she found herself alone: how to use a rifle, how to navigate by sun and stars, how to treat wounds and illnesses with plants from the forest. When Sarah questioned the urgency of these lessons, Daniel simply said, "Knowledge keeps you free. Dependency makes you vulnerable." As the leaves turned gold and crimson, Sarah realized she was with child again. She shared the news with Daniel on an evening when they sat by the fire, Rebecca asleep in her cradle. "A brother or sister for Rebecca," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Daniel's eyes widened, a mixture of joy and apprehension crossing his face. "Are you certain?" Sarah nodded. "The same signs as before. The babe should come in late spring." Daniel pulled her into a gentle embrace, his forehead resting against hers. "This time will be different," he promised. "You won't face it alone." The memory of Lily's death hung unspoken between them. Sarah knew Daniel still carried the guilt of being absent when his first wife needed him most. This time he would make sure history did not repeat itself. As winter approached, Daniel began construction on an addition to the cabin, a second room that would serve as a sleeping chamber for the growing family. Sarah watched him work, admiring the strength and precision with which he fitted logs together, created a small window, laid a wooden floor. By the first snowfall, the room was complete, furnished with a larger bed frame Daniel had crafted and a cradle for the new baby. "This is beginning to feel like a proper home," Sarah observed as she hung curtains she had sewn from traded cloth. Daniel surveyed their work with satisfaction. "Not just a shelter anymore?" "It never was just a shelter," Sarah corrected gently. From the moment you brought me in from the storm, it's been a home. The winter proved milder than the previous one, allowing Daniel to hunt more regularly. Sarah's pregnancy progressed without complications, her body stronger this time, nourished by their abundant food stores, and free from the stress and deprivation that had marked her carrying of Rebecca. Christmas brought a rare journey to the settlement. Daniel had been reluctant, but Sarah was determined that Rebecca should experience some of the traditions of her heritage. They arrived to find the small community gathered at the church for a service led by Reverend Wright, who welcomed them with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Creek, a pleasure to see you again," he greeted Sarah, admiring Rebecca in her arms. "And my, how your daughter has grown." Sarah introduced Rebecca proudly, accepting the Reverend's blessing for the child. To her surprise, several of the settler women approached her afterward, curious about her life in the wilderness and admiring the beadwork Daniel had added to Rebecca's dress. "You seem happy," observed the Reverend's wife, Mary, as they shared a simple meal in the church. "Life in the forest agrees with you." "It does," Sarah confirmed. "I found purpose there, and peace." Mary glanced toward Daniel, who stood at a distance, conversing quietly with the Reverend. "And your husband, is he good to you and the child?" "The best of men," Sarah replied without hesitation. "He treats us with nothing but love and respect." Mary nodded, satisfied. "That's what matters in the end. Not where a man comes from or what blood runs in his veins, but how he treats those entrusted to his care." The journey back to their cabin was slow, hampered by light snow, but filled with a new sense of connection to the wider world. Perhaps, Sarah thought, they need not be entirely isolated. Occasional visits to the settlement would give Rebecca and the new baby exposure to both sides of their heritage. February brought the first stirrings of the child within her, fluttering movements that Sarah shared with Daniel by placing his hand on her growing belly. His expression of wonder at feeling the life they had created together moved her deeply. "You've given me so much," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "A second chance at happiness." "We've given each other that chance," Sarah corrected. "Equal partners, remember?" As the snow began to melt and the first green shoots appeared in the forest, rumors of conflict grew stronger. Traders passing through spoke of skirmishes to the north, of settlers abandoning outlying homesteads, of troops gathering at the forts. Daniel began taking longer scouting trips, sometimes staying away overnight, to speak with other solitary dwellers in the region, gathering information and assessing risks. He returned from one such journey in early April with a tightly controlled expression that immediately put Sarah on alert. "What's happened?" she asked, setting aside the shirt she was mending. Daniel placed his rifle carefully on its hooks before answering. "A family was killed 20 miles north of here. Settlers claim it was Shawnee raiders." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her belly. "Was it?" "No," Daniel said flatly. "The marks on the bodies were wrong. The timing of the attack, not consistent with tribal patterns. This was made to look like a native attack. Who would do such a thing? Men who want war." Daniel's voice was grim. "Men who see profit in conflict, in pushing the tribes further west, in taking more land." That night, as Rebecca slept peacefully, and Daniel held Sarah close, they spoke in hushed tones about the future. For the first time, Daniel raised the possibility of leaving. "There are places farther west, beyond the reach of settlements, where we could start again," he suggested. "Land where both our children could grow up free from the troubles brewing here." Sarah considered the idea. The cabin had become so much a part of her that the thought of leaving it behind caused a physical ache. Yet the safety of their family had to come first. "Would we go alone?" she asked. Daniel stroked her hair thoughtfully. "There are others, mixed families like ours, peaceful hunters, people who want no part in the coming conflict. We could travel together, for safety." "When would we need to decide?" "Soon," Daniel admitted. Before the birth, traveling with a newborn would be dangerous. The decision was made for them a week later when Daniel returned from checking his trap lines with news that changed everything. "I found tracks near the western ridge," he reported, his expression grave. "Soldiers, a scouting party, moving quietly, not more than a day old." Sarah felt a chill despite the spring warmth. Looking for what? Or whom? Daniel began gathering his hunting tools. "I need to warn Martin and his family. They're the closest." Martin was a former fur trader who had married a Miami woman, living in isolation similar to Daniel and Sarah, but closer to the traditional tribal territories. If soldiers were searching for native encampments, Martin's homestead might be mistaken for one. "How long will you be gone?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. 2 days, 3 at most. Daniel cupped her face in his hands. "Stay inside as much as possible. Keep the rifle loaded and near." After he left, Sarah moved through the cabin restlessly, checking and rechecking the bar on the door, the shutters on the windows. Rebecca sensed her mother's anxiety, becoming clingy and fretful. Sarah sang to her, attempting to maintain a facade of normalcy, while her mind raced with contingency plans. On the second day of Daniel's absence, Sarah was in the garden, harvesting early spring greens with Rebecca playing on a blanket nearby, when she heard the unmistakable sound of horses approaching. Setting down her basket, she scooped up Rebecca and hurried toward the cabin. She was halfway to the door when 4 riders emerged from the trees. 3 wore the uniforms of American soldiers. The 4th was dressed in civilian clothes. Sarah froze, her arms tightening protectively around Rebecca. The civilian rode forward, studying her with open curiosity. He was middle-aged, with graying brown hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. "Good day, ma'am," he called. "Apologies for startling you. I'm Colonel James Fletcher, Special Envoy from the Territorial." "Governor?" Sarah nodded cautiously, but remained silent. "We're looking for a half-breed who goes by the name of Daniel Creek," Fletcher continued. "I'm told he traps in this region." "May I ask why?" Sarah forced her voice to remain steady. Fletcher's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Merely to speak with him about the movements of certain hostile elements in the territory. Creek knows the forest better than most. His insights could be valuable to maintaining peace." Sarah doubted very much that peace was this man's objective. "I'm afraid I can't help you, sir. My husband is away hunting. I don't expect him back for several days." Fletcher's eyebrows rose. "Husband? You're Creek's wife?" "I am." Sarah lifted, her chin slightly. "Sarah Creek, and this is our daughter Rebecca." Fletcher exchanged glances with the soldiers before turning back to Sarah. "Forgive me, Mrs. Creek, but you seem unexpected. Are you not aware of your husband's history with the Shawnee warriors?" "My husband has no connection to any warriors," Sarah replied evenly. "He lives peacefully, trades fairly. He wants no part in conflicts." "A convenient position," Fletcher remarked. "Yet his father was known to have ties to Tecumseh's brother, the Prophet, and Daniel himself disappeared for nearly a year during the last uprising. Curious timing, wouldn't you say?" Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. Daniel had never spoken of such things, but she knew enough of the territory's history to understand the implication. The prophet Tenskwatawa was a spiritual leader calling for native resistance against American expansion. "I say you're mistaken, sir," she replied firmly. "My husband is a trapper and hunter, nothing more." Fletcher studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps, or perhaps you don't know him as well as you believe." He glanced at the cabin. "May we water our horses at your creek, Mrs. Creek? It's been a long ride." The request was polite, but Sarah sensed the underlying command. These men would not be easily turned away. "Of course," she conceded. "The creek runs behind the cabin. Help yourselves." As the soldiers dismounted, Fletcher remained on his horse, his gaze never leaving Sarah. How long have you been married to Daniel Creek, if I may ask? Nearly a year, Sarah answered, shifting Rebecca to her other hip. The child was unusually quiet, sensing the tension in her mother's body. And did you know him long before that? Sir, I don't see how my marriage is any concern of the territorial governor, Sarah replied, her patience wearing thin. Fletcher smiled thinly. Everything in this territory is the governor's concern, Mrs. Creek, especially unusual arrangements that might have bearing on security matters. One of the soldiers had wandered toward the cabin, peering through the window. Another was inspecting the garden, the livestock pen, the smokehouse, taking inventory of their possessions. The third remained with the horses, but his hand never strayed far from his weapon. Sarah realized with a growing alarm that this was no chance encounter, no random patrol. These men had been looking specifically for Daniel's homestead. The question was why, and how much they already knew. "If you'll excuse me, sir," she said, starting toward the cabin. "My daughter needs her afternoon rest." Fletcher nodded, but as Sarah moved past him, he added in a lower voice, "A word of advice, Mrs. Creek. When your husband returns, tell him cooperation would be wiser than resistance. The winds are changing in this territory. Best not to be standing in their path." The threat was thinly veiled but clear. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral as she entered the cabin, closing the door firmly behind her. She placed Rebecca in her cradle, then moved to the window, watching as the men watered their horses, conferring in low voices. After what seemed an eternity, they mounted and rode away, but Sarah took no comfort in their departure. They would be back, if not these men specifically, then others like them. The peaceful existence she and Daniel had built was suddenly terrifyingly fragile. That night, alone in the cabin with Rebecca sleeping beside her, Sarah placed a protective hand over her unborn child and made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever truths lurked in Daniel's past, she would protect their family. The wilderness had taught her strength. Daniel had shown her courage. She would need both in the days ahead. Daniel returned the following afternoon, his approach careful and measured as he emerged from the forest. Sarah had been watching anxiously from the window, Rebecca on her hip, and rushed outside to meet him. "Soldiers came," she blurted out before he could speak. "4 of them led by a Colonel Fletcher. They were asking about you." Daniel's expression darkened as he quickly ushered her back inside the cabin. Once the door was barred behind them, he set down his rifle and took Rebecca from Sarah's arms, holding his daughter close for a moment before returning his attention to his wife. "What exactly did Fletcher say?" he asked, his voice controlled but tense. Sarah relayed the conversation in detail, watching Daniel's face grow more troubled with each word. When she mentioned Fletcher's references to Tecumseh's brother and Daniel's unexplained absence during the previous conflict, his jaw tightened visibly. "Is it true?" she asked quietly when she had finished. "What he implied about your past?" Daniel was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the cabin wall as if seeing something far beyond it. Finally he sighed and met her eyes. "Not in the way he makes it sound," he said. "But there are connections he's right about." "Tell me," Sarah urged, taking his hand. "I need to know what we're facing." Daniel nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "My father knew Tecumseh, yes. They had hunted together as young men, shared a vision of peace between our peoples." His expression grew distant. "When my father chose to live apart with my mother, some called him a traitor to the Shawnee way. But Tecumseh respected his choice, even visited us once when I was a boy." "And the year you were away?" Sarah prompted. "After Lily died, I was lost." Pain flickered across Daniel's face at the memory. "I wandered north, lived with my mother's people for a time. While there, I met Tenskwatawa, the prophet, as the whites call him. Fletcher called him Tecumseh's brother. He is. But while Tecumseh seeks to unite the tribes politically against white expansion, Tenskwatawa preaches a spiritual revival, a return to traditional ways, rejection of white goods and customs. Daniel's voice took on a note of respect. He healed something in me, helped me find my way back to myself after losing Lily and our son. Did you fight with them? Sarah asked directly. Daniel shook his head. No, I was present at gatherings, listened to the teachings, but never took up arms. When Tenskwatawa called for war, I returned here. He squeezed her hand. I wanted no part in bloodshed, Sarah. I still don't. Sarah believed him. In all their time together, she had never seen Daniel raise a hand in anger, never heard him speak of violence except as a last resort for protection. Yet Fletcher and men like him would see only what they wished to see, a half-breed with connections to native resistance. What do we do now? She asked. Daniel's expression was grim. We need to leave. Tonight. Sarah's hand went protectively to her swollen belly. But I'm nearly 7 months along, which is precisely why we can't wait, Daniel insisted. Fletcher's visit wasn't a coincidence. He's been gathering information, building a case against certain sympathizers in the territory. He stood, moving to check the window before continuing in a lower voice. Martin told me that 3 mixed-blood families north of here were arrested last week, their homes burned. The men were taken to Fort Washington on charges of conspiracy with hostile tribes. The women and children were left with nothing. Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. What happens to the men? Daniel's silence was enough. I'll start packing, Sarah said, rising with sudden urgency. How far do we need to go? West, beyond the Wabash River. There are tribes there still strong enough to keep the army at bay, settlements of people like us who live in peace. Daniel went to the corner of the cabin and pried up a floorboard, revealing a small cache. He extracted a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. I've been trading for gold and silver, not just goods, enough to start again. They worked quickly, gathering only what was essential: food, clothing, weapons, tools. Daniel harnessed their 2 horses to the small cart he had built for trading journeys. Sarah wrapped their most precious possessions, her Bible, Daniel's mother's jewelry, Rebecca's baptismal gown, in oilcloth and secured them in a pack. By nightfall they were ready. We'll travel only at night for the first few days, Daniel explained as he helped Sarah into the cart, settling Rebecca beside her. Stay off the main trails, ford the streams to break our trail. With luck, we'll be well away before Fletcher realizes we've gone. Sarah looked back at the cabin as they pulled away, the moon casting its sturdy outline in silver. Just over a year ago, it had been her salvation, a haven from certain death in the winter storm. Now they were leaving it behind, fleeing into uncertainty once more, yet this time was different. She wasn't alone, wasn't abandoned. She had Daniel's steady presence, Rebecca's trusting eyes, and the child growing within her. They would build again, somewhere new. The first night's journey was slow and tense, the cart moving silently through forest paths only Daniel could discern. By dawn, they had covered perhaps 10 miles, reaching a small clearing where Daniel had previously built a lean-to for hunting trips. They concealed the cart and horses, then rested through the daylight hours, speaking only in whispers. Rebecca, sensing the gravity of the situation, remained unusually quiet, content to play with the small wooden toys Daniel had packed for her. Sarah dozed fitfully, her dreams troubled by images of soldiers and burning cabins. They continued this pattern for 3 nights, traveling under cover of darkness, hiding during the day. The terrain grew more difficult as they moved west, crossing ridges and valleys untouched by settlement. Sarah's pregnancy made the journey increasingly uncomfortable, but she never complained, understanding the necessity of their flight. On the 4th day, as they sheltered in a cave near a small waterfall, Daniel returned from scouting with news. "Riders on the main trail," he reported, his expression tense. "6 men moving fast, army uniforms." "Looking for us?" Sarah asked, drawing Rebecca closer. "Maybe, or just regular patrols. Either way, we need to stay hidden until they pass." He glanced at Sarah's exhausted face. "Rest now. I'll keep watch." Sarah nodded, settling back against the cave wall with Rebecca in her arms. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded her as she considered their situation. They had perhaps 2 weeks of hard travel before reaching the relative safety Daniel spoke of. Her child wasn't due for another 2 months, but the strain of the journey and the stress of their flight concerned her. What if the baby came early, somewhere in this wilderness? As darkness fell again, Daniel roused Sarah gently. "The soldiers have moved on," he said. "But there's a storm coming. We should wait it out here." The cave proved a blessing as rain lashed the forest outside, turning trails to mud and streams to torrents. For 2 days they remained sheltered, their small fire kept low to prevent smoke from revealing their location. Daniel ventured out only briefly to tend to the horses and check their surroundings. During this forced pause in their journey, Sarah found herself studying her husband with new eyes. There were depths to Daniel she was only beginning to understand, connections to a world and history she had been taught to fear. Yet she felt no doubt about the man himself, his character, his love for her, and Rebecca. "Tell me about Tenskwatawa," she said on the second evening as they sat beside the fire. "What were his teachings that helped you?" Daniel looked surprised by her interest, but pleased. "He speaks of balance between the spirits and the physical world, between humans and animals, between different peoples." His voice took on a rhythmic quality, as if reciting something memorized. Long ago, he taught that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from knowing oneself, one's purpose in the greater design. "And what is your purpose?" Sarah asked softly. Daniel's gaze found hers across the fire. "Once, I thought it was to live alone, to honor my parents' memory by maintaining their way of life." A small smile touched his lips. "Now I know it's to protect what we've built together, to raise our children in both traditions, to create something new from something ancient." The simple conviction in his voice moved Sarah deeply. Whatever lay ahead, whatever hardships they might face, they would face them united by a shared vision. The storm passed, and they resumed their journey, now traveling by day as they moved into less populated territories. The terrain grew flatter, with broad prairies interspersed with stands of forest. Game was plentiful, allowing Daniel to hunt fresh meat for their meals. 10 days into their journey, they encountered their first sign of other travelers. Fresh tracks of multiple horses and what appeared to be a small wagon. Not military, Daniel observed, crouching to examine the impressions. "See the pattern of the wheels? Trader, most likely. Or settlers." "Should we avoid them?" Sarah asked, watchful. "For any threat," Daniel straightened, considering. "Actually, it might be wise to make contact. Traders carry news, might know which routes are being patrolled." They followed the tracks cautiously, Daniel scouting ahead while Sarah drove the cart. By mid-afternoon, they spotted smoke rising from a small camp beside a stream. Daniel returned to Sarah, his expression thoughtful. "It's Martin and his family," he reported, "along with 2 other families I know from trading, the Newcombs and the Harpers. All mixed households, all heading west. For the same reasons as us?" Sarah asked. Daniel nodded grimly. "Fletcher's reach is longer than I thought. Best we join forces. Safety in numbers." The reunion with Martin was bittersweet. A burly man, with graying hair and the weathered face of a lifetime outdoorsman, he embraced Daniel warmly before turning a kind eye to Sarah and Rebecca. "So this is the woman who tamed the lone wolf," he said with a gruff laugh. "Martin Blackhawk at your service, ma'am." Sarah liked him immediately. His direct manner reminded her of Daniel, though Martin was more voluble, quick with a joke or story. His wife, Wren, was a quiet, dignified Miami woman who welcomed Sarah to the fire and made a space for Rebecca among the other children. That evening, as the three families shared a meal around the campfire, Sarah learned that their flight was part of a larger exodus. Fletcher had been authorized by the territorial governor to identify and neutralize native sympathizers within the settled regions. His methods were ruthless and indiscriminate. He burned out the Williamses last month, reported John Newcomb, a former frontiersman married to a French Potawatomi woman. Tom Williams had served with Wayne's army, fought against the tribes. But his wife was half Wyandot. That was enough for Fletcher. "Where are they now?" Daniel asked. "Dead," Newcomb replied bluntly. "Both of them. Children taken to an orphanage in Cincinnati." The news cast a pall over the gathering. Sarah felt Rebecca's weight against her side, the child drowsy with sleep, and silently promised that such a fate would never befall her daughter. "We're heading for Prophetstown," Martin explained, referring to the settlement established by Tenskwatawa. "It's growing, not just Shawnee now, but many tribes, even some whites who've married in. They say there are hundreds living there in peace, following the prophet's teachings." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "It's well defended. The army wouldn't risk an attack?" "Not yet," Martin conceded, "but tensions are rising. Tecumseh is gathering warriors, building a confederacy. If he succeeds, there could be open war." Sarah caught Daniel's eye across the fire, reading the concern there. They had fled one conflict only to potentially head into another. That night, as they settled in the small tent Martin had loaned them, Sarah voiced her worries. "If Prophetstown stands between the American forces and Tecumseh's warriors, won't that place us directly in harm's way?" Daniel sighed, drawing her close. "It's a risk, yes. But right now, it's the only place where families like ours can live openly, without fear of men like Fletcher." He kissed her forehead gently. "We don't have to stay permanently. Once the child is born, once we know what path the conflict takes, we can decide whether to move on." "Where?" Sarah asked. "How far must we go to find peace?" "The Spanish territories, perhaps, beyond the Mississippi." Daniel's voice held a note of weariness. "But that's a decision for another day. For now, we focus on reaching Prophetstown before your time comes." The expanded party traveled more slowly, but with greater security. The men took turns scouting and hunting, while the women managed the camp and cared for the children. Sarah found unexpected comfort in the company of Wren and Catherine Newcomb, both experienced mothers who offered reassurance about her pregnancy and the birth to come. 2 weeks later, they reached the Wabash River, its broad flow marking the boundary of their journey. On the far bank lay lands controlled by the western tribes, including the settlement they sought. The crossing proved challenging, the spring rains having swollen the river. It took a full day to construct a crude raft for the carts and belongings, while the stronger horses were swum across with riders. Sarah and the other women and children crossed on the raft, guided by ropes held by the men already on the opposite shore. As she set foot on the western bank, Sarah felt a curious sense of completion, as if she had crossed not just a river, but a boundary in her life. Behind lay the world of her birth, of rigid settlements and Fletcher's prejudice. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility, a community where families like hers might find acceptance. They made camp for the night on a bluff overlooking the river. As darkness fell, Daniel and Sarah stood together at its edge, watching the moonlight glimmer on the water below. "No turning back now," Sarah observed softly. Daniel's arm tightened around her. "Do you regret it, leaving everything you knew?" Sarah considered the question seriously. She thought of her life before Thomas, the small-town existence that had once seemed her only possible future. Then Thomas had appeared with his grand promises and charm, sweeping her into an adventure that had nearly destroyed her. And then Daniel, solid, honest Daniel, offering not promises but presence, not excitement but steadfastness. "I left nothing of value behind," she said finally. "Everything that matters is here with me now." She guided his hand to her rounded belly, where their child kicked strongly against his palm. "Or coming soon," Daniel smiled, the worry lines around his eyes softening. "You amaze me, Sarah Creek. Most women would be broken by what you've endured." "Not broken," Sarah corrected. "Forged, like iron in fire." She gazed across the river toward the Eastern Territories. "I was not meant for a small life. I see that now. Neither was Rebecca, nor this little one." She patted her belly. "Whatever lies ahead, we face it together." In the firelight behind them, the children of the three families played together, their laughter rising into the night air. Rebecca sat in Wren's lap, watching the older children with solemn interest, occasionally breaking into delighted giggles. At their antics, Sarah took in the scene, feeling a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she had been seeking all along. Not just a husband or a home, but a community, a place of belonging for herself and her children. Tomorrow, they would continue their journey toward Prophetstown. Beyond that lay an uncertain future, shaped by forces larger than themselves, the ambitions of men like Fletcher, the resistance of leaders like Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa, the inexorable westward push of American settlement. But tonight, on this riverbank under the stars, Sarah allowed herself to hope. The child within her would be born in a place where both sides of its heritage were honored. Rebecca would grow up knowing her father's traditions as well as her mother's, and Daniel, the man who had once resigned himself to solitude, would have the family he deserved. Sarah leaned against her husband's strength, watching the river flow past, carrying the past away with it. Ahead lay the unknown, but she faced it without fear. She had wandered lost and pregnant once before, finding shelter with a Shawnee hunter who had given her not just refuge, but a future. Whatever came next, they would meet it together. Prophetstown rose from the prairie like a vision of another world, neither fully native nor European, but something uniquely its own. As their small caravan approached after 5 days of travel from the Wabash crossing, Sarah took in the sprawling settlement with wonder. Hundreds of structures dotted the landscape near the confluence of the Tippecanoe and Wabash rivers. Traditional wigwams stood alongside log cabins. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and fields of young corn stretched into the distance. Children of various hues played together among the dwellings, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "It's larger than I expected," Sarah commented, as Daniel helped her down from the cart. "Tenskwatawa's message draws many," he explained, "those seeking a return to older ways, those fleeing prejudice, those simply looking for peace." Martin rode ahead to announce their arrival, returning shortly with a delegation of 4 men. The leader, a tall Miami with gray-streaked hair, greeted them in English. "Welcome to Prophetstown," he said. "I am Gray Fox, one of the council elders. Martin tells me you seek refuge from the troubles in the East." Daniel stepped forward. "I am Daniel Creek. This is my wife Sarah and our daughter Rebecca." He gestured to the other families. "We've traveled together for safety. All of us have been forced from our homes by the actions of Colonel Fletcher and his men." Gray Fox's expression darkened at Fletcher's name. "We know of this man. His reputation spreads like poison." He studied the group, his gaze lingering on the children and pregnant women. "You will find shelter here. The prophet teaches that all who seek peace are welcome, regardless of birth or language." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, they had reached safety. The baby within her kicked vigorously, as if sharing her sentiment. Grey Fox led them through the settlement to an area where several newly built cabins stood vacant. "These were constructed for those like yourselves," he explained. "More arrive each moon. The word spreads that here mixed families can live without hiding." Each family was assigned a cabin. Though simple, the dwelling allocated to Daniel, Sarah, and Rebecca was clean and sturdy, with a stone fireplace, a bed frame, and basic furnishings. After weeks of travel, sleeping under tents or the open sky, it felt like luxury. "We'll make it home," Sarah said as she explored the single room, already planning where to place their few possessions. Daniel nodded, though Sarah noticed his gaze, frequently turning toward the center of the settlement, where a large council house stood. "I should meet with the leadership," he said finally, "learn the expectations, the rules of this place." "Will you see Tenskwatawa?" Sarah asked, remembering Daniel's stories of the prophet who had helped him find his way after Lily's death. "Perhaps." "If he's here." Daniel's expression was hard to read, a mixture of respect and wariness. The prophet travels between many camps, spreading his message. That evening, a communal feast welcomed the newcomers. Residents brought dishes to share: venison stew, cornbread, wild rice, berries preserved from the previous summer. Sarah sat with Wren and Catherine, watching as Daniel conversed with the settlement's men, his expression animated in a way she rarely saw. "Your husband is well respected," observed an older woman, who introduced herself as Sarah White Deer, a healer in the community. "They say he once trained with the prophet himself." Sarah nodded, not surprised that Daniel's history was known here. "He speaks of that time with gratitude." Sarah White Deer studied her knowingly. "But you wonder what it means for your future here." "I want peace for my children," Sarah admitted, "not to be caught between warring sides." The older woman nodded. "A wise concern. These are troubled times." She glanced at Sarah's pregnant belly. "When is your child due?" "Another month, perhaps a little more." "Come to me tomorrow," Sarah White Deer instructed. "I have herbs that will strengthen you for the birth." As the community celebration continued around them, Sarah found herself observing the varied inhabitants of Prophetstown with fascination. Here were Shawnee, Miami, Potawatomi, Delaware, and other tribes she couldn't identify, alongside people of mixed heritage like Daniel, and even a few who appeared fully European. They conversed in multiple languages, children switching effortlessly between them in their play. Rebecca, initially shy, had been adopted by a group of slightly older children who included her in their games, seemingly unconcerned by her inability to understand their words. Sarah watched her daughter's delighted face as she ran after a rolling hoop, her previous wariness forgotten. "She belongs here already," Daniel commented, returning to Sarah's side. "And you?" Sarah asked. "Do you feel you belong?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "It's strange. I've lived apart for so long I'd forgotten what it means to be among others who understand both sides of my heritage." He took her hand. "But my home is with you and our children, wherever that may be." The next days brought a settling-in period as they adjusted to life in Prophetstown. Daniel joined hunting parties, his skills earning him quick acceptance among the men. Sarah, despite her advanced pregnancy, participated in women's work, processing hides, weaving baskets, preserving food. Rebecca thrived in the company of other children, quickly picking up words in Shawnee and Miami. Sarah kept her appointment with Sarah White Deer, visiting the healer's cabin, where dried herbs hung from the rafters and clay pots bubbled over a small fire. The older woman examined her with gentle hands, nodding with approval. "The child is strong, well-positioned," she pronounced, "but you carry tension in your shoulders, worry in your heart." Sarah couldn't deny it. Despite the settlement's welcoming atmosphere, she remained anxious about the future. "There's talk of war," she confessed, "of the Americans moving against the native Confederacy. What happens to this place, to all of us, if conflict comes?" Sarah White Deer handed her a cup of steaming tea. The prophet seeks peaceful resistance, a return to our ways, yes, but without bloodshed. His brother Tecumseh. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Tecumseh believes we must stand together against further encroachment, that only through unity can the native peoples survive. And the people here, where do they stand? Divided, like all people in times of uncertainty. The healer sighed. Some young men have already left to join Tecumseh's warriors. Others believe in the prophet's path of spiritual renaissance without conflict. And what do you believe? Sarah asked. The old woman's eyes held ancient wisdom. I believe that change comes like a river. It can flow gently around obstacles or crash through them with destructive force. The wise find ways to ride its currents rather than fight against them. As the days passed, Sarah came to understand that Prophetstown existed in a delicate balance. It represented Tenskwatawa's vision of cultural revival and peaceful coexistence, but it also served as a gathering point for those who might eventually join Tecumseh's military resistance. This duality created an underlying tension that occasionally surfaced in council meetings or around evening fires. One afternoon, as Sarah sat outside their cabin mending clothes while Rebecca napped within, a disturbance at the settlement's edge drew her attention. Riders were approaching, native messengers from distant camps, judging by their dress and demeanor. The settlement buzzed with anticipation as they were escorted to the council house. Daniel returned early from hunting, his expression grave. Tecumseh has arrived, he told Sarah when they were alone. He's meeting with the council now. Sarah felt a chill despite the warm spring day. Here? Why? To rally support, gather warriors. Daniel began cleaning his rifle methodically, a habit he fell into when troubled. There are rumors that Governor Harrison is raising an army, planning to move against native settlements, including this one. Daniel nodded grimly. Prophetstown represents everything the Americans fear. Tribes uniting, preserving their culture, refusing to simply disappear westward. He set the rifle aside, taking Sarah's hand. Tecumseh has asked all able men to join him in a show of strength. A gathering at Vincennes, where Harrison is based. Sarah gripped his hand tightly. And you? What will you do? The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Daniel had always maintained his desire to stay removed from conflict, to protect his family above all else. Yet Sarah had seen the fire in his eyes when discussing the injustices faced by his father's people, the flash of anger when recounting Fletcher's threats. I've been asked to attend the council tonight, Daniel said finally, to hear Tecumseh speak. Will you go? Sarah asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Yes. Daniel met her gaze directly. But only to listen. I need to understand what we're facing, what choices lie before us. That evening, as Daniel joined the men at the council house, Sarah sat with Wren and Catherine on a bluff overlooking the settlement. The women had formed a bond of shared circumstance, all married to men of mixed heritage, all carrying children who would inherit both worlds, all uncertain of what the future held. My husband says we should move further west, Catherine confided, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. Beyond the Mississippi, where the Americans haven't yet reached. Is there such a place anymore? Wren wondered aloud. Each year they push further. Each treaty they make, they break when it suits them. Sarah watched the stars emerging above them, thinking of the journey that had brought her here. From Pennsylvania to Ohio, from abandoned wife to Daniel's partner, from fear to strength. Perhaps it's not about finding a place they haven't reached, she suggested, but about creating communities they cannot break. The council meeting lasted well into the night. When Daniel finally returned, Sarah was still awake, sitting by a Low fire outside their cabin. One look at his face told her the news was not good. Tecumseh believes war is inevitable, he reported, sinking down beside her. Harrison continues to sign treaties with individual chiefs, taking land that belongs to all tribes. The British are encouraging resistance, promising support against the Americans. "What does that mean for Prophetstown?" Sarah asked. "Tecumseh wants warriors from here to join him at Vincennes." Daniel stared into the fire. Tenskwatawa counsels patience, spiritual preparation, but many of the young men are eager to follow Tecumseh. "And you?" Sarah forced herself to ask the question she most feared. "What do you choose?" Daniel turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "My father taught me that a man's first duty is to protect his family. My place is with you and Rebecca, and our unborn child." Relief washed through Sarah, though it was tempered by the knowledge that his decision might not be so simple. "And if the conflict comes to us? If we can't remain apart from it? Then we'll face it together," Daniel promised. "But for now, we prepare for the birth of our child and build our place in this community." The following weeks brought an uneasy calm to Prophetstown. Some young men departed to join Tecumseh, while others remained, committed to Tenskwatawa's path of spiritual renewal. Life continued, crops were tended, children played. The rhythms of the community provided a sense of normality, despite the tensions brewing beyond their borders. Sarah's time grew closer, her body preparing for birth. She spent hours with Sarah White Deer, learning the traditional medicines and practices that would ease her labor. Daniel completed their cabin's furnishings, crafting a cradle for the new baby and toys for Rebecca. On a warm evening in late May, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, Sarah felt the first twinges of labor. Different from the panicked contractions that had marked Rebecca's early arrival, these pains came gradually, steadily, her body confidently preparing for what it knew to do. Daniel sent for Sarah White Deer, who arrived with her basket of herbs and cloths. Wren came to take Rebecca to her home for the night, assuring the child that when she returned, she would have a new brother or sister. "This birth will be different," Sarah White Deer promised, as she helped Sarah walk around the cabin. "During early labor, your body is stronger now, wiser." Sarah nodded, breathing through a contraction. "Less afraid," she managed when it passed. "Fear is the enemy of birth," the healer agreed. "Your daughter came early in difficult circumstances. This child waits, for the right time comes with strength." As night fell, the storm broke over Prophetstown, rain drumming on the cabin roof, thunder echoing across the prairie. Sarah's labor intensified with the storm, her body working in powerful waves to bring forth new life. Daniel remained by her side, supporting her through each contraction, his quiet strength anchoring her through the pain. Near midnight, as the storm reached its peak, Sarah gave the final pushes that brought their son into the world. His cry rose above the thunder, strong and indignant at his abrupt entry into the cold air. "A boy," Sarah White Deer announced, placing the infant on Sarah's chest. "Born in thunder." A powerful sign. Sarah looked down at her son's flushed face, counting fingers and toes as she had with Rebecca, marveling at the perfect new being they had created. Daniel knelt beside them, his expression one of awe as he touched the dark hair that already uncovered the baby's head. "He looks like you," Sarah whispered, recognizing Daniel's high cheekbones and strong brow in the tiny face. "What shall we call him?" Daniel asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah had been considering names throughout her pregnancy, wanting something that would honor both their heritages. "James," she suggested, "after my father, and for his Shawnee name, Wathu," Daniel finished. "Thunder, James Wathu Creek." As the storm gradually moved eastward, its fury spent, a peaceful quiet settled over the cabin. Sarah White Deer completed her ministrations, ensuring Sarah was comfortable and the baby properly swaddled before taking her leave, promising to return in the morning. Left alone with their new son, Sarah and Daniel sat together on their bed, the infant sleeping contentedly between them. Outside, the occasional distant rumble of thunder marked the storm's retreat. 2 children now, Sarah mused, her exhaustion mingling with profound joy. One born in winter's retreat, one in spring's fullness. Both strong like their mother, Daniel replied, his hand covering hers. Both free to know both sides of their heritage. Sarah thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment, the abandonment that had seemed like the end of her world, becoming instead the beginning of something far more precious than she could have imagined. Had Thomas not left her behind, pregnant and desperate, she would never have found her way to Daniel's cabin, never discovered the strength within herself, never known this fullness of love and purpose. "What do you think the future holds for them?" she asked softly, gazing down at their sleeping son. Daniel was silent for a moment, considering. "Challenges," he admitted finally. "The world they're born into doesn't easily accept those who bridge 2 worlds, but also possibilities we can't yet imagine, strength from both traditions, wisdom from different ways of seeing." "And us?" Sarah asked him. "What future do you see for us amid the coming storms?" Daniel's arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her closer. "I see us creating something here that can withstand whatever comes, not just a home, but a legacy. Teaching our children to walk the line between 2 worlds not as a burden, but as a gift. Building a community that doesn't ask people to be only one thing or another, but embraces the wholeness of who they are." Outside their cabin, Prophetstown slept under the clearing skies, its inhabitants dreaming different dreams. Some of peaceful coexistence, others of resistance and struggle. The future remained uncertain, shaped by forces beyond their control. Governor Harrison's ambitions, Tecumseh's determination, the inexorable westward push of American settlement. Yet within these walls, in this moment, Sarah felt an unshakable certainty. Whatever came, they would face it together. The woman who had once been abandoned, pregnant and desperate, had found not just shelter, but a purpose larger than herself. And Daniel, the solitary hunter caught between 2 worlds, had found a family that embraced all aspects of his identity as dawn broke over Prophetstown. James Wathu Creek slept peacefully in his parents' arms, unaware of the complex world he had been born into or the challenges that lay ahead. For now, he was simply loved, the living embodiment of the bridge his parents had built between their separate worlds, and the promise of something new emerging from what had come before. Summer settled over Prophetstown in waves of green and gold. The corn grew tall in the fields, children splashed in the shallows of the Tippecanoe River, and life took on a rhythm that might have seemed peaceful to an outside observer. But beneath the surface of daily activities, tensions continued to build, as rumors of Governor Harrison's intentions spread through the settlement. For Sarah, the first months after James's birth passed in a blur of contentment and exhaustion. The baby thrived, growing stronger each day, his dark eyes increasingly alert and curious about the world around him. Rebecca had taken to her role as older sister with serious dedication, helping Sarah with small tasks and singing the Shawnee, lullabies she had learned from the other children to her brother. Daniel integrated further into the community, his hunting and tracking skills earning him a place on the Council of Hunters responsible for providing game for the settlement. He spent most days out with hunting parties, but always returned by nightfall, unwilling to be apart from his family for long in these uncertain times. On a particularly hot July afternoon, Sarah sat in the shade outside their cabin, nursing James, while Rebecca played with the daughter of their nearest neighbors. Wren approached, carrying a basket of freshly harvested berries. "A gift," she said, setting the basket beside Sarah. "The first blackberries of the season." "Thank you," Sarah smiled, adjusting to James as he fed. Join me? Wren settled on the ground nearby, her own pregnancy now clearly visible. How is the little thunder child today? Growing stronger by the hour, it seems, Sarah replied, gazing down at her son. And yours? Wren patted her rounded belly. Active. Martin says this. One will be a warrior, always fighting inside me. A shadow crossed Sarah's face at the mention of warriors. Have you heard any news from the men? Daniel spoke of a council meeting last night, but said little about it this morning. Wren's expression grew serious. More messengers arrived from Tecumseh. Harrison has refused further meetings, begun reinforcing the fort at Vincennes. She lowered her voice, though no one was nearby to overhear. There is talk that American scouts have been seen within a day's ride of Prophetstown. Sarah's arms tightened protectively around James. Scouts? Military? Unclear. But the council has increased patrols, sent runners to warn outlying camps. Wren picked at a loose thread on her skirt, a nervous gesture. Martin believes Harrison is gathering information, planning the best approach for an attack. Surely they wouldn't attack Prophetstown directly. Sarah's voice betrayed her concern. There are women, children, elders here, not just warriors. Wren's smile held no humor. When has that ever stopped them before? She stood, brushing dust from her dress. Be watchful, sister. Keep supplies ready. Martin says we may need to move quickly if trouble comes. After Wren departed, Sarah sat for a long time, watching Rebecca play while James dozed against her chest. The peaceful scene before her contrasted sharply with the alarm Wren's words had triggered. In the 4 months since arriving at Prophetstown, she had allowed herself to believe they had found a safe haven, a place where their children could grow up knowing both sides of their heritage without fear or prejudice. Now that sense of security was crumbling. When Daniel returned that evening, his features were taut with unspoken concerns. He greeted the children with his usual warmth, but met Sarah's questioning gaze with a slight shake of his head. Not now, not in front of Rebecca. Later, after both children were asleep, they sat together outside beneath a sky ablaze with stars. Daniel confirmed Wren's report and added details that sent a chill through Sarah despite the summer warmth. Harrison has written to the War Department describing Prophetstown as a collection of the worst and most desperate characters from various tribes, he told her, his voice low. He claims we're planning attacks on frontier settlements, gathering weapons from British agents in Canada. That's not true, Sarah protested. The prophet preaches peace, spiritual renewal. Tecumseh seeks unity, resistance. Harrison either he cannot or will not distinguish between the two. Daniel's jaw tightened. Or perhaps it serves his purpose to conflate them. What does the council say? Will we prepare to defend Prophetstown if Harrison moves against us? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. The settlement is divided. Some, mainly the younger men, want to join Tecumseh in open opposition. Others believe in the prophet's path of spiritual resistance without violence. He paused. Tenskwatawa has been fasting, seeking visions to guide the people. And what do you believe? Sarah asked softly. Daniel was silent for a long moment, his gaze on the stars above. I believe, he said finally, that there are times when a man must stand against injustice, even knowing he cannot win. Sarah's heart constricted at his words. And our children, what becomes of them if their father falls in a battle he cannot win? Daniel turned to her, taking her hands in his. That's why I've come to a decision. I want you to take Rebecca and James to the northern camps near the Great Lakes. There are settlements there, far from Harrison's reach, where you would be welcomed. And you? Sarah's voice trembled slightly, despite her effort to control it. I would stay with the defensive force here, not to fight unless attacked, but to ensure that if Harrison comes, There is time for the women, children, and elders to escape. Daniel's grip tightened on her hands. I cannot abandon these people, Sarah. They took us in when we had nowhere else to go. Sarah withdrew her hands slowly, rising to her feet. And I cannot abandon you, she said firmly. We are a family. We stay together, whatever comes. Sarah, no. She cut him off with uncharacteristic sharpness. I was left behind once before, Daniel. I won't allow it to happen again, not even for noble reasons. Daniel stood as well, towering over her in the darkness, but Sarah held her ground. This isn't like what Thomas did, he argued. I'm trying to protect you and our children. And who protects you? Sarah countered. Who ensures you don't face Harrison's army alone while your family flees into the night? She stepped closer, laying a hand on his chest. We found each other through the worst storms, Daniel Creek. I won't lose you to this one. The resolve in her voice seemed to reach him. Daniel's posture softened, and he drew her into his embrace. What would you have us do, then? We prepare, all of us together, Sarah said against his shoulder, and we watch for signs of Harrison's approach. If conflict becomes inevitable, then we'll leave as a family, find a new place, further from American settlements. Daniel was silent for a long moment, considering her words. It won't be easy, he warned. The journey north with young children in haste. Easier than living without you, Sarah replied simply. The weeks that followed took on a dual nature for the Creek family. On the surface, they maintained their daily routines, Daniel hunting, Sarah tending the children, and working with the other women, Rebecca playing with her friends. But beneath this normalcy ran currents of preparation and vigilance. Daniel built a small travois that could be quickly attached to their strongest horse, designed to carry supplies and the children. If they needed to flee, Sarah gathered emergency provisions, dried meat, corn, medicines, extra clothing, packed in bundles that could be grabbed at a moment's notice. They studied maps with Martin, discussing routes north that would avoid American settlements and forts. August brought increasing signs of trouble. Traders arrived with news of American troop movements, of a new fort being constructed just 3 days' ride from Prophetstown. Tecumseh departed for the Southern Territories, seeking to build his confederacy among the Creek, Cherokee, and Choctaw tribes, leaving Tenskwatawa in charge of Prophetstown's defense. The prophet intensified his spiritual leadership, conducting ceremonies to strengthen the people's resolve and connection to traditional ways. Sarah occasionally attended these gatherings with Daniel, watching as men and women danced around sacred fires, listening as Tenskwatawa shared his visions of a world where native peoples reclaimed their lands and lived according to the ancient customs. Do you believe in his visions? Sarah asked Daniel as they walked home from one such ceremony. Daniel considered the question carefully. I believe he speaks from conviction, he said finally. Whether his visions come from the Creator or from his own hopes, I cannot say. And his power? They say he can command fire, predict events, cure illnesses. I've seen him heal sickness through knowledge of plants and prayer, Daniel acknowledged. As for the rest, he shrugged. Faith has power of its own, regardless of whether the miracle is real or perceived. September brought cooler air and the first hints of autumn in the turning leaves. The harvest began in earnest, the community working together to gather and store crops for the coming winter. On the surface, Prophetstown continued to function as a peaceful agricultural settlement. But beneath this ordinary activity, preparations for possible conflict accelerated. Warriors practiced with weapons away from the main settlement. Scouts ranged ever farther, monitoring American movements. Caches of food and supplies were hidden in the forest, escape routes marked with signs only the initiated could read. One crisp morning, as mist rose from the river, a scout burst into the settlement, his horse lathered with exertion. The news he brought sent ripples of alarm through Prophetstown. Harrison was on the move with nearly 1,000 men, regular army, militia, and allied native warriors from tribes opposed to Tecumseh's confederacy. The council gathered immediately. Though not a member, Daniel attended as one of the designated hunters. He returned to their cabin with grim determination etched on his face. "Harrison's force is 3 days away," he reported as he gathered his weapons. "The prophet has called all warriors to prepare. He says his medicine will protect us, make the Americans' bullets turn to water, their weapons fail." Sarah, who had been mending a tear in James's swaddling blanket, set her work aside. "You don't believe that?" It wasn't a question, but Daniel answered anyway. "I believe in courage, in fighting for what's right. But I've seen American weapons. No medicine turns their bullets to water." "Then why are you preparing to fight?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "To buy time," Daniel replied simply. "If Harrison reaches Prophetstown, the women, children, and elders will need as much warning as possible to escape. Every warrior who stands against them means more families reach safety." Sarah rose, moving to the corner where their emergency packs were stored. "Then we should leave now before the fighting starts. You promised, Daniel. We stay together." Daniel crossed to her, gently taking the pack from her hands. "The council has asked all able hunters to scout Harrison's approach, to report on his numbers and movements. I'll be back before nightfall tomorrow, and then we'll leave, north as we planned." Sarah searched his face, looking for signs of deception, but found only resolve mingled with regret. "You swear it. Tomorrow we leave, all of us together." "I swear it," Daniel confirmed, "by whatever powers you wish me to invoke." Sarah nodded once, accepting his word. "Be careful," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "James needs to know his father's stories. Rebecca needs your guidance. And I—" her voice caught. "I need the man who found me in a storm and gave me shelter when all seemed lost." Daniel drew her close, his embrace fierce yet gentle. "I will return," he promised against her hair. "Nothing could keep me from you and our children." He departed an hour later with 5 other scouts, their horses moving swiftly through the morning mist. Sarah watched until they disappeared into the forest, then turned her attention to preparations for their own journey. She sorted through their possessions, setting aside all but the most essential items, packing food and medicines with careful attention to weight and necessity. The settlement hummed with similar activity, families preparing for possible evacuation while warriors readied themselves for battle. Yet amid this tension, ordinary life continued. Children played, meals were cooked, babies nursed at their mothers' breasts. Sarah found herself noting these mundane details with heightened awareness, as if imprinting them on her memory before. They were lost. Night fell with no word from the scouting party. Sarah put the children to bed in their usual places, though she had their travel clothes laid out nearby. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She sat by the fire, mending items they would need for the journey, listening to the sounds of the settlement gradually quieting around her. Dawn came with thin, watery light, filtering through morning fog. Still no sign of Daniel or the others. Sarah went about her morning tasks mechanically, feeding the children, checking their preparations, exchanging brief, tense conversations with neighbors similarly awaiting news. Midday brought a single rider, not Daniel but one of the younger scouts who had accompanied him. The young man's face was streaked with dirt and what looked like dried blood, his horse nearly spent from hard riding. Sarah was among those who gathered as he delivered his news to the council. Harrison's force was larger than expected, moving faster than anticipated. They had captured 2 of the scouts. The others had scattered, planning to return by different routes to avoid detection. "And Daniel Creek?" asked Grey Fox, voicing the question that burned in Sarah's throat. The young scout shook his head. "We were separated when the soldiers spotted us. He was heading northwest, toward the marshes, said he would circle back after dark. Sarah returned to their cabin, forcing herself to remain calm for the children's sake. She completed their preparations, loaded the travois, and settled in to wait, telling Rebecca stories to distract her from the tension Sarah couldn't fully hide. As afternoon faded toward evening, a new commotion arose in the settlement. Sarah stepped outside to find people gathering their belongings, warriors painting their faces for battle. "What's happening?" she asked Catherine Newcomb, who was hurrying past with her children. "Harrison's force has been spotted at the edge of the marshes," Catherine reported breathlessly. "Less than half a day's ride from here. The prophet has ordered women and children to move to the camps upriver, while the warriors prepare to defend the settlement." Sarah's heart seemed to freeze in her chest. "But the scouts, Daniel—" Catherine's expression softened with sympathy. "If they're out there, they'll find us at the upriver camps." She adjusted the pack on her shoulder. "We need to move now, Sarah. It's not safe to delay." Sarah hesitated, torn between the need to protect her children and her desperate desire to wait for Daniel. The memory of his promise echoed in her mind. "I will return. Nothing could keep me from you and our children." But what if something had? What if he was wounded, captured, or worse? "We'll wait until full dark," she decided aloud. "If he's not back by then, we'll join the others upriver." Catherine looked like she might argue, but merely nodded and continued on her way. Sarah returned to their cabin, where Rebecca waited with wide, solemn eyes, holding James in her small arms. "Is Papa coming soon?" she asked. Sarah managed to smile. "For her daughter's sake. We hope so, little one. But if he doesn't arrive by nightfall, we'll need to go meet the others by the upriver camp. Papa will find us there." As shadows lengthened across Prophetstown, more families departed, heading north along the Tippecanoe River to designated safe camps. Warriors gathered at the southern edge of the settlement, their numbers far fewer than Harrison's reported force. Sarah watched these preparations with growing dread, the hours slipping away with no sign of Daniel. When only a handful of stars were visible in the darkening sky, Sarah made her decision. She secured James in a sling across her chest, helped Rebecca into her warmest clothes, and loaded their essential supplies onto the travois. With a final glance at the cabin that had been their home for the past months, she led their horse toward the northern path. They had just reached the edge of the settlement when a figure emerged from the forest, tall, moving with familiar purpose. Despite obvious exhaustion, "Daniel!" Sarah's cry caught in her throat as she ran toward him, Rebecca at her heels. Daniel swept Rebecca up with one arm, pulling Sarah and James close with the other. For a long moment, they stood locked together, no words necessary between them. When he finally released them, Sarah saw the grim determination in his eyes. "Harrison's forces surround the marshes," he reported quietly. "They're moving in formation, artillery in the center. They'll reach Prophetstown by mid-morning tomorrow." "The prophet says they'll fight," Sarah told him. "That his medicine will protect the warriors." Daniel's expression darkened. "It's a slaughter in the making. We need to leave now, tonight, not just to the upriver camps, further north toward the lakes." Sarah nodded, relief flooding through her that Daniel had reached the same conclusion. "Everything's ready. We can go immediately." As they turned to leave, a voice called from behind them, "Creek!" They turned to find Tenskwatawa himself approaching, flanked by two warriors. The prophet's painted face was severe in the gathering darkness, his single eye gleaming with fervent intensity. Sarah had seen him only at a distance before, leading ceremonies. Up close, his presence was powerful, compelling. "You're leaving," Tenskwatawa observed. Not a question, but a statement. Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah and the children. "My family's safety must come first," he said respectfully but firmly. "And what of your people's safety?" the prophet demanded. "Every warrior is needed to defend Prophetstown." "This isn't a battle that can be won," Daniel replied quietly. "You know that, even if you cannot say it to the others." Tenskwatawa's expression revealed nothing, but his gaze shifted to Sarah and the children. For a moment, his severe countenance softened. "The little ones should be spared what comes," he acknowledged. Then, looking back at Daniel, "But you understand both worlds. Your voice could sway others to our cause, even now." "My understanding of both worlds is precisely why I know this confrontation can only end one way," Daniel said. "Harrison has artillery, trained soldiers. Your warriors are brave, but bravery alone cannot stop cannon fire." The prophet was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if seeing beyond the present moment. "Perhaps," he said finally, "some must survive to carry the memory of what happens here, to tell the truth when others lie." He reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a small object, a carved stone pendant on a leather cord. This he handed to Daniel. "Go north, find painted Rock's people near the Great Lake. Show them this, tell them what you witness here." He looked again at Sarah and the children. "Protect them, teach them both paths, the old and the new. The future will need those who can walk between worlds." With that, he turned and strode away, his warriors following without a backward glance. Daniel stood motionless, the pendant gleaming dully in his palm. "What does it mean?" Sarah asked softly. "A safe passage," Daniel replied, slipping the cord around his neck, "and a burden, to witness, to remember, to tell the truth of what happens here." He turned to her, his decision made. "We go north now. Stay off the main trails, travel by night when possible." Sarah nodded, helping Rebecca onto the horse, while Daniel checked the travois one final time. As they moved away from Prophetstown, following a narrow path that led into the deep forest, Sarah glanced back at the flickering fires of the settlement. Warriors danced around them, preparing for a battle they could not win, believing in protection that would not come. The night enfolded the Creek family in darkness as they journeyed north, leaving behind the community that had sheltered them. Ahead lay uncertainty, but they faced it together. The abandoned woman who had found her strength, the solitary hunter who had found his heart, and the children who carried both their legacies forward into an unknown future. 20 years later, Northern Michigan Territory, 1832, Sarah Creek, stood at the edge of the lake, watching the morning mist rise from its surface. At 45, silver now threaded her dark hair, and lines of experience marked her face. But her eyes remained clear and bright, reflecting the same determination that had carried her through the many journeys of her life. Behind her, the settlement of New Harbor spread along the lake shore. 24 cabins, a meeting house, fields of corn and wheat. The community had grown steadily over the years, populated by families like her own, who existed between worlds, neither fully native nor European, but something uniquely their own. The sound of footsteps on the rocky shore drew her attention. Daniel approached, still tall and straight-backed at 50, though the years had etched deep lines around his eyes and frosted his dark hair. He carried a bundle of fishing nets, just returned from checking his traps in the early morning hours. "The lake is generous today," he said, setting down his catch. "Enough trout for the council feast tonight." Sarah smiled, reaching out to touch his weathered face. Even after all these years, the sight of him returning safely from his work still filled her with quiet joy. Rebecca sent word. "They'll arrive by midday." Daniel nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Their daughter, now 21, had married a young teacher from a missionary family 2 settlements over. The match had raised eyebrows on both sides, but Rebecca had her mother's determination. She had built a school that taught children from native and settler families alike, preserving traditional knowledge alongside reading and mathematics. "And James?" Daniel asked. "Any word?" Not since his last letter in spring. Sarah's voice held an edge of concern. Their son had left 2 years earlier to study medicine in Boston, combining his knowledge of traditional healing with formal training. But he promised to return for the gathering marking 20 years since they had fled north from Prophetstown. 20 years since the Battle of Tippecanoe, where Harrison's forces had attacked the settlement at dawn, defeating the Prophet's warriors and burning the village to the ground. 20 years of building a new life in the aftermath, honoring Tenskwatawa's charge to remember and tell the truth of what had happened. Each year, families who had escaped Prophetstown gathered to share stories, renew connections, and ensure the younger generation understood their history. This year would be the largest gathering yet, with representatives from tribes across the Great Lakes region joining them. "He'll come," Daniel assured her. "He carries the responsibility as seriously as you do." They walked together toward their cabin, one of the largest in the settlement. Daniel had built it with the same care he'd put into their first home, but this one reflected the 2 decades of growth and change they'd experienced, a blend of traditional design and practical innovations, with separate rooms for privacy and large windows that welcomed the light. Inside, Sarah set about preparing for the day while Daniel cleaned his catch. The rhythm of their partnership had been refined over years of shared work and purpose, each anticipating the other's needs with the ease of long practice. As midday approached, the settlement stirred with activity. Visitors began arriving, families in canoes and on horseback, bringing food and gifts, greeting old friends with embraces and laughter. Children ran between cabins, playing games that blended traditions from multiple cultures. Sarah stood on their porch, watching for Rebecca's arrival, when a figure on horseback appeared on the northern trail. A young man with Daniel's height and bearing, but with Sarah's features softened in his face. James had returned. The reunion brought tears to Sarah's eyes as she embraced her son, noting how his 2 years of study had matured him. At 19, James Wathu Creek carried himself with quiet confidence, his traditional upbringing balanced. "With formal education, Boston hasn't changed you too much, I see," Daniel observed with approval, clasping his son's shoulder. James smiled. "They've taught me much about medicine, but nothing they teach could make me forget what I learned from you and Mother." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "I've recorded it all, just as you asked. Our family's story from the beginning." Sarah took the book with reverent hands. For years, she had shared their history with James and Rebecca, ensuring they understood the journey that had brought them to this place. 2 winters ago, James had decided to preserve these stories in writing, interviewing elders from various communities and documenting the history that official records often overlooked or distorted. "It's complete?" she asked. "As complete as any." "History can be," James replied. "From Prophetstown to New Harbor, from Thomas's abandonment to the community we've built." By evening, the gathering was in full swing. A large fire blazed in the center of the settlement, surrounded by members of a dozen different tribes and mixed families. Rebecca had arrived with her husband and their infant daughter, completing the circle of family. As darkness fell, the time for storytelling arrived. As tradition dictated, the elders spoke first, sharing memories of lands lost, battles fought, and communities reformed. When Sarah's turn came, she rose, James's journal in her hands. 20 years ago, she began, her voice strong and clear. "I stood at the edge of Prophetstown, pregnant with my second child, watching my husband return from scouting Harrison's approaching army. We left that night, carrying little but our children and the hope for a future." The gathered people listened in respectful silence as Sarah recounted the journey northward. The harsh winter they survived in a temporary camp, the gradual formation, of alliances with other displaced families, the founding of new harbor on land offered by the Ojibwe, who recognized their need for a home. "We built this place not as a refuge from the world," she continued, "but as a bridge between worlds. Our children learn the old ways and the new, speak multiple languages, carry forward the best of all their heritages." She turned to where Daniel sat, their eyes meeting across the firelight. None of this would exist if a single hunter had not given shelter to an abandoned woman in the depths of winter, if he had not seen value in what others cast aside. Daniel's expression softened with memory and enduring love. For a moment they were transported back to that first night in his cabin when Sarah had awakened to warmth and safety after nearly perishing in the storm. "From hardship comes strength," Sarah told the gathered people. "From loss comes a new beginning. This is the lesson our journey has taught us." As she resumed her seat, James stood, opening the journal to share passages from their documented history. His voice, educated yet rooted in tradition, carried the stories forward for a new generation. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Sarah and Daniel walked together along the lakeshore, away from the noise and light of the gathering. The moon cast a silver path across the water, and stars filled the clear night sky. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked, gesturing back toward the thriving community. "That night when you found me half frozen in the snow?" Daniel's arm encircled her shoulders. "I imagined nothing beyond getting you safely to shelter," he admitted. "I had lived so long alone, I'd forgotten how to envision a future with others in it." "And now look at us," Sarah marveled. "Grandparents, community elders, keepers of history. Not bad for a half-breed trapper and an abandoned pregnant woman," Daniel observed with dry humor. Sarah laughed softly, leaning into his embrace. "We've come far from that trading post where Thomas left me." "Do you ever wonder what became of him?" Daniel asked. Sarah considered the question. In the early years, she had occasionally wondered about Thomas's fate, whether he had found what he sought in the Western Territories. But as time passed, he had faded from her thoughts, becoming little more than a character in the story she told. The man whose betrayal had unwittingly led her to her true destiny. "No," she answered honestly. "His part in our story ended long ago." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight on the water. Behind them, the sounds of the gathering continued. Drums, songs, laughter. Their children were there, and their grandchild, and the extended family of the community they had built together. "We should return," Daniel said eventually. "They'll be looking for us." Sarah nodded, but lingered a moment longer, savoring the peace of the moment. "I was thinking of that first night," she confessed. "How desperate I was. How afraid for my unborn child. If you hadn't opened your door—" "But I did," Daniel interrupted gently, "just as you opened your heart to a life you never expected." Sarah smiled, taking his hand as they turned back toward the lights of the settlement. The path before them was illuminated by moonlight, clear and certain, leading home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.